Okay, we might make a start. It is 1 o'clock, and I'm sure Dan has got quite a lot of things to talk about, and to make sure we've got a bit of time for question and things like that in the end, we'll probably make a prompt start. So this webinar is hosted by the National Association of Enabling Educators of Australia, and in particular the Indigenous Students Special Interest Group that Dan runs. The topic today is Yarning Circles, a richer learning experience. If you are engaging in social media, please, we encourage you to use the hashtag NAEEAWS, and the NAEEA Twitter handle is at 01NAEEA. Before I begin, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we meet today. I know that today we have participants from different parts of Australia as well as many other countries. So although we are meeting online, we are still physically on traditional lands. As we continue to walk in the first footprints of Aboriginal people, no matter where we are on this land, we recognize the important role the traditional elders have played in education, research, and knowledge creation. Thus, I would like to respectfully acknowledge all elders and officially welcome everyone to this session. I would also like to encourage you to introduce yourself using the chat by acknowledging the lands from which you are joining us today. Just quick logistics for today. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat as well. As I said, we will have some time for question and answers in the end as well, and you will be able to unmute yourself at that time to vocalize your questions if you have any. We're so happy to have Mr. Daniel Collins from the University of Newcastle. Dan is the acting YAPWERK program convener in the Pathways and Academic Learning Support Centre within the Wallatuka Institute of Indigenous and Engagement and Advancements, once again at University of Newcastle. My name is Pranit Anand. I'm a lecturer in learning design at Queensland University of Technology and also an executive of the National Association of Enabling Educators of Australia. So before we go on, I'd just like to ask Dan to if he wants, he can share the screen and get started.
Nice. With the right screen, I've got it right.
We can see your desktop, Dan. That's the problem with multiple screens, I think, isn't it?
It is. Okay, I've got it now. So good.
That looks much better.
Yep, cool. All right, beautiful. So yeah, I'll introduce myself first. My name is Dan Collins. I'm the YAPWERK convener at Newcastle, and I'll talk about what that sort of involves as we go through the slides. I'm a proud Warramai Biripi man from around the Taree Nabiac area, which is about an hour and a half north of Newcastle. And I'm leading the Indigenous Students Special Interest Group. I've put my email in the chat. So if anyone's interested, although you have to scroll up a bit, if anyone's interested in being involved with that, send me an email. We haven't really, I'm just sort of starting out in it. So I'm open to ideas and working with different people and whatever people think is going to be useful. So I'm going to do this webinar on yarning circles. I'm not professing to be any sort of an expert, and I'm not sure if what I'm doing in my context will work for you, but I'm just going to share with you the way I've got it to work well for me. and I'm hoping that you can take something from it. So here's the outline we put up for the event. Yarning circles are an authentic Aboriginal pedagogy method. They facilitate a sense of belonging by providing a safe space to explore ideas and opinions whilst building relationships between participants. Yarning circles encourage listening respectfully, valuing others' opinions, and self-reflection. In a learning environment, they allow students to build on pre-existing knowledge and put new knowledge into a context and propose ideas in a non-linear fashion. So this presentation will focus on the use of yarning circles within an enabling course to provide a rich learning experience. And further to that, yarning circles are a timeless way of learning. So they've been used from time before we have any direct records, obviously, and our stories and narratives that reflect our experience, affirm our identity, and allow us to share the significant meanings of our life and culture. Through sharing and interweaving our understandings, we may see a way to learn that was not initially apparent. And it certainly wasn't apparent to me in my 20 years previously as a high school teacher. I used to be a physics/science high school teacher for about 20 years until I made my way into the enabling space. So I think we can all agree that students are more successful when they experience their learning material in multiple modalities in different ways, and elaborate on material to make those meaningful connections. And these connections occur throughout the learning, and initial connections shouldn't be ignored. That's what everything else is going to build on. So I found this yarning circle methodology to be a really effective way of starting off those connections, making sure they're really strong into pre-existing knowledge, and everything can move on smoothly, hopefully, from there. The exact form used, I don't think is really important, as it'll need to be modified to suit the situation. As I said, I'm just going to tell you the approach that I've used. But I guess that they're all going to involve communicating information in some way and showing care for different viewpoints. I've tied the things that happen with my yarning circle method sort of into the 8 ways of learning, because lots of people talk about the 8 ways of learning, but often it's not really demonstrated exactly how it should happen, or to give really sort of concrete examples. So I picked out these 8 ways as really having some relevance to what I'm doing. So we've got the first one there is community links. So in any learning, we should always relate content back to local community context and find the relevance for the students. With land links, we need to locate the knowledge where it's from in terms of location and time. Story sharing is the obvious one, I guess. To yarn and tell stories is a way into the learning, and this makes personal connections to the new knowledge, links it to existing knowledge, and informs of different viewpoints. Non-linear is the 4th one, bringing together different student viewpoints to create a shared starting point of what you're learning. Students co-create the knowledge, and this is the start of the cycle of learning. And it could even cycle around back to having a second yarn later on throughout the lesson. And non-verbal, encouraging the use and observation of non-verbal systems of feedback from students. So even though we're using words, could also be tone of voice, which is still sort of the words, I guess, but technically non-verbal, gestures, facial expressions, feedback from other listeners. So just to give you a little bit of a background of what my context is, the YPUG program is an enabling program run at Newcastle University. So students in your PUG turn at least 18 in the year they start the program, but they could range. We have students up to generally probably up to around sort of 50 years of age. So it's a very wide range of age in students. They must establish their status as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students within the university. So it's not open to students that self-identify, I guess is probably the best term to use. So students can do that through UAC if they choose to apply through UAC, or they can just apply directly to the university. But if they don't have sufficient documentation to establish their status, then they would be directed into another enabling program at the university, probably Open Foundation or New Step. The students come from a wide range of educational backgrounds. So we have students that have just left high school. Some of them might have failed a bit at high school, but some of them might have been reasonably successful, but just had some bad life experiences through the HSC year. We get students that completed high school, maybe had a go at tertiary education years ago. Maybe they did TAFE courses and now they want to go further. Maybe they dropped out of high school in year 9 30 years ago and haven't done anything since. So we have a very wide range of educational backgrounds and sort of skills and abilities and knowledge. We generally start with a cohort size of around 40 to 50. The students can complete 80 units of study in 1 year and must complete within 2 years. So it's the same study load as they would be doing in undergraduate. And then it just depends on the pace at which they want to move through that. They have to take at least half of their load in your PUG specific courses, which only people within the your PUG program can enroll in. And that's probably on the outside the biggest difference. So the maximum class size they would ever be in would be 40 to 50, and most of them are probably around half that for the other UPUG courses. The rest of their load can be made up with subjects from the Open Foundation program. Like if they want to go into engineering or so something really specific, they might pick Open Foundation courses that add into that and give them more background knowledge around that, or they might just be testing the waters and having a look at different options. For me, the big difference on the inside of the UPUG program is that students really develop a strong sense of belonging. They're in a pretty small cohort, and most of their class sizes are actually smaller than that. So they're not lost in big lecture theatres of 200 students. A lot of their classes are timetabled around the Birrabine building, where the Wallatuka Institute is centred, on the Callaghan campus at Newcastle. And their support services are all based here as well. So the students aren't, they're not wandering around, not knowing people. They're seeing people all the time that they know. And the staff here can easily support the students, offer them assistance with anything they need. And the students, honestly, they refer to Wallatuka as their second home, which is lovely. I teach 2 courses into that, 1 per semester, as well as doing all the convening organisational sort of roles. So my courses focus on professional practice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander individuals and organisations. So I have 1 in semester 1 and a follow-up in semester 2. They run for about 3 to 4 hours a week, and that's for a 12-week semester. And the aim of my course is to develop role models for students so they can sort of see what they're aiming for, introduce them to different career possibilities, skills in critical thinking, background knowledge around different ways in which Aboriginal organisations and Aboriginal people operate, and resilience and a social conscience. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Here's a little to try and explain it in a more user-friendly way without so many words. I put this together. So I've got what my friends think I do, what my wife thinks I do. I'm sure she thinks I just hang out at the uni bar all day. What society thinks I do, what my mum thinks I do. I'm probably being a bit unkind to my mum there. She's quite a practical person. I'm sure she doesn't think that's what I really do, but I thought it was funny. So what I think I do, and then what I really do. Not too much difference. I'm pretty close. So what does the actual process look like? And obviously, I don't have any pictures, I don't have any video, but I do have a sound recording of to give you a bit of a feel for what the process actually, what actually happens. So each week there's stimulus material provided. It could be to read, it could be to watch, or it could be to listen to before the class begins. And for this particular lesson that I've got an audio file for, it was on attitudes, beliefs, and values. And I had given them this YouTube video to watch about how culture drives behaviours. So this guy who was doing the YouTube clip, he was basically talking about how different cultures, people from different cultures can perceive other people from other cultures in certain ways that aren't necessarily correct. That people are looking through these cultural glasses, and that's going to affect your perception of how other people are acting. So this is just an audio recording. It's the best quality I can get, and it's not very loud. So you're probably going to have to turn up your sound so that you can hear it clearly. It goes for about 3 minutes, and there's 2 different female students talking.
Yeah. So yeah, watching that video, kind of reflected a little bit back to my childhood, because like I moved from different states, so from Queensland to Northern Territory and to here. So my upbringing was always like, if you see people, you say hello. You have that friendly sort of reaction, and that's something that was also culturally based. Like our culture is very friendly, because no who you are, so say hello. But yeah, moving here, well, I moved to Singleton about 16 years ago, and that was a bit of a culture shock. Yeah, just people didn't want to say hello, and it was trying to get used to that. And I was thinking back to the video, and the guy was saying like, if, I don't know, I think he was from Norwegian, and he was living in Canada.
It's from Canada.
It's from Canada. Okay, and he was like, well, why is this guy saying hello to me? And then he realised like, that's how he grew up, that's how they used to say hello. I mean, they used to always say hello. So that sort of reflected on my, yeah, so when we moved here, just people weren't very as open as what I was used to. So we used to think, you know, they were just plain rude, but that sort of made me think, well, if that's not what they're used to, and that's sort of how they grew up, they're not being rude, that's just how they are. So it sort of made me reflect on that a bit, yeah, that it wasn't necessarily personal, it's just how they were.
In that sense, with like culture and attitudes, with my dad, so he's like a true blue Aussie. Growing up, my mum obviously drove like our culture into my brother and I, more so myself. Like I was growing up always the one getting into events and everything, but the thing is my brother kind of wasn't. He was kind of straying away from our culture, not getting involved and everything. And yeah, I think like my dad's very prejudiced in the sense of like he you know says he's so like proud if we get like achievements, but when it comes to like Invasion Day, he doesn't respect that he does have Indigenous kids, and with what happened, he always knows how to get me with, you know, like that's something that I have to deal with constantly about anything relating to my culture. I don't even go to him about it because I just know I'm going to cop it. And something that, you know, you think having a child that you support them and their culture, but yeah, I guess his views kind of got in the way of that a little bit. So I think, yeah, how he's like born and bred and how he was raised is kind of a bit different to how his kids are now. You know, that's, yeah, in that sense of having different views and having to grow up with that. But yeah, that's kind of how I relate to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see that I was when I first introduced this, I was worried the students mightn't really engage with it, but you can see that they really are engaging and they really are sharing some personal experiences of themselves and thinking and following a process of thinking through sort of what it means and relating it back to what the lecture is going to be about. So that was actually in week 3 of the course. So they didn't start off like that. That's after 3 weeks, but very quickly they came to really to get involved and share their information.
Yeah. So yeah, watching that.
All right. So when I'm teaching, I take what I call my shotgun approach. I was discussing it with someone the other day. I'm not a sniper trying to shoot one student. I'm trying to shoot all of them, hopefully. So I'm using a wide range of strategies, and I think the yarning circles fit really well into that. So because, I mean, they can benefit from having instructors who teach in different ways, because sometimes it just clicks. So that can be me. And as an experienced educator, I know that I can also explain it in certain ways, but I know that sometimes, for whatever reason, no fault of mine, no fault of the students, sometimes it just doesn't click. So, and sometimes it can be another student that can explain it to them. And for some reason, maybe the student is coming from a place of lesser knowledge and therefore maybe goes into it in more detail or whatever reason. For that student, they all of a sudden understand it. It can also help them to become more versatile as learners and be able to work and communicate with a variety of people, because part of the thing that I'm trying to do to prepare them for is to potentially work in different places to what different spaces to what they might have previously encountered. So some of my students will go on to work in an organisation where they might be the only Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person, or they might work for an organisation that's basically an Aboriginal organisation where all the people are Aboriginal, or it might be something in between. So I'm trying to prepare them for different settings. And while this teaching style can potentially appeal to all learning styles, I'm certainly aware that some students might have trouble adjusting to the shifts in format or activities, because it's a little bit out of left field, I guess, for some people. But to reduce these effects, what I've used a very standardized format for each class. And in the introductory lecture, I actually outline exactly how each lecture is going to run, with a proviso that occasionally we'll move off the script a bit as it's required. But I follow a very similar series of events each lesson when I'm going through my things. So what sort of benefits are we going to see out of something like this? I think we're drawing on students' past experiences and connecting them to this new theme that we're going to explore. So the students are learning where they are, and I'm learning where they are as well, and they're becoming personally involved, which provides more meaning and motivation. We're examining the connections with that new theme, and the students are in dialogue with each other. So they really have to, they're forced to engage, really. They can't just sit there and drift off so much as they can when I'm with my lovely monotone, just rambling on and on. They're sharing their perceptions and ideas, and they're exploring their thinking. We also, and so we're creating an experience that really engages learners, drawing on prior knowledge, experiences, values, taps into perceptions, and I try to include as little new content at that stage as possible. So they've got this short bit of stimulus material that's not going to take them too long to engage with in their own time, which stops them coming up with excuses as to why they can't do it. But I'll also often allow a bit of an out so that if they haven't looked at it, they can still engage in the circle in a meaningful way. I think the most important thing is to get off to a really solid start. So to ensure that process is successful, I think you have to really clearly set out the procedure that you're going to follow through. So while the discussion might be really, really open, they might want to talk about a stimulus material. I usually have 2 different forms, if possible, or they might just want to share a personal story that they think relates in some way. So the discussion itself is quite open, but the procedure needs to be pretty defined. And we'll have a look. I've got a big, nasty set of rules that I'm going to go through in a minute. And when I pick the first time that we do it, I pick a really easy thing to do. So by easy, I mean it's quite familiar, very relevant, not controversial for the first one. And so let's have a look at that. So this is actually one of my slides out of my week 1 lecture, which is just a basic sort of introductory lecture where I spell out sort of what's going to happen each week. And had a little video. So for the first lecture, I didn't put any stimulus material because I didn't know there was going to be any. So we watched this little video about a student yarning circle, and that was our stimulus material. And then we did a yarning circle on it. It was just a video from another university that sort of where students talked about using yarning circles and whether they were good and what they got out of it. So this was, and then I put up this set of questions for them to see that this is what we were going to do a yarning circle on. So all things that they shouldn't have too much trouble in answering. Who's your mob, which isn't a controversial question for these students because they know who. It can be a controversial question for some people, but it's not for them because they're all reasonably confident in their identity. They know where they're from. That's how they got their status established at the university. So, and then what background are you coming from? And so they can just basically say where they finished in school and what they've done in their life up to this point. What are they most excited about in starting your pug? And what's your biggest fear or concern for this year? So all things that they can easily just talk about. And then I put up this long list of rules. And we went through the rules and talked about them. And then after we went through the rules, then I went back and put up these questions and we did our yarning circle for the first time. And it worked really well. And they really did follow the rules. as the semester went on, they followed the rules less, almost to the point where I needed to. I think I went through the rules again the second lesson, and then I basically didn't show the rules again. I just sort of see how they went with it. And at the start of next semester, I could have some students that didn't do the first semester course, so I'll put up the rules again for them. But most of the students will already know how it's going to work. So what I'm going to do is, rather than just go through all those rules now, I'm going to break them down and go through each sort of one in turn, and sort of talk a bit about it so you can sort of see how it works. All right, so rule 1, form a complete circle. Ensure that everyone is seated equally and that everyone can see all participants in the circle. This is as the first, I mean, this is the most important rule. It has to be a circle. And I've seen some people sometimes sort of try and sit out the circle and justify it, but you really need to make sure that you have that full circle. Occasionally we end up with a couple of, just as we move the desks around, rearrange the chairs, we end up with a few blank spots, which isn't that bad, because occasionally there'll be someone who comes in late, as students often do, and they're going to need a spot to sit in that circle. I think during the audio you could hear a loud clunk as someone must have come in through the door. But what's that actually going to look like? So you may have seen lots of schools in my area are putting in yarning circles that look like this, and they look fantastic. And they probably make people feel really good inside. I think they probably make Aboriginal people feel good inside, because they're sort of feeling that their culture is respected, and I'm quite sure they're making non-Aboriginal people feel good inside, because they like to think that they're doing something for Aboriginal people and helping out Aboriginal education. But they're not really what my talk is about. And I don't use any sort of elaborate setup like that, as you probably saw from my what I think I do slide before. Oops. This is what mine look like. Not nearly as exciting, I guess. But they don't look so great, but they make people feel good inside for a different reason. And I think that good feeling actually lasts longer and is more authentic and means more, because the people in the circle are sharing information, thoughts, their stories, and they are making real connections with each other, building relationships, sharing knowledge. And I think that in the end, that's going to give us a much better feeling and a longer lasting one than a pretty circle of stones that can only be used in certain weather. So rule number 2, everyone is equal and all responses are valid. The circle is a safe place where everyone is required to contribute and where all opinions are valid. A response may be a word, a sentence, or extended explanation, and it could even be a gesture. What is said in the circle stays in the circle. And this works surprisingly well in my context. I don't know how well it would work in other contexts, like maybe in a high school, it wouldn't work so well. But certainly the students all commented that they all felt safe in giving their opinions. I don't think there was a single actual real disagreement in any sort of anger way. People gave different opinions, but if people didn't agree with what was being said, they had to save it and wait until it was their turn to talk. And the funny thing is that by the time it gets back to you, you've generally forgotten what you disagreed with the other person about anyway, and so you can't even see it. What it actually looks like in action. So in a yarning circle, all participants are provided with an opportunity to speak in a safe, non-judgmental place and to share their strengths in an inclusive and collaborative learning environment. The yarning together should always try to focus on strengths, not problem solving or criticism, but I didn't do anything to actually enforce that. Because then I would have been interjecting and telling people what to do, which I tried not to do as much as possible. And sometimes people didn't want to contribute. So I'll talk about that in a minute. What happens if they don't want to say anything? Rule number 3. So before the yarn starts, all the participants must check in relation to the issue. And this is done by, could be showing thumbs up, thumbs down, flat palms to demonstrate how they feel about the issue that's for discussion, or how they're feeling themselves. And it could be to clarify with a few words. But in actual fact, that's an example of where I didn't exactly follow the rules, because that's not what we actually did. The students checked in as was their turn to talk. We didn't do a big check-in before. They just had a bit of a general check-in while they were going to talk, as just to start them off. What I found it allows students to do is, number one, it allows them to share any good news they may have had, or any bad news, any sort of news, I guess. So it allows them to share a bit of a personal story that they might want to share that's not actually related to the theme, as long as they don't talk about it too long. And probably more importantly, it allowed me to judge if I should push them for a bit more detail, or who might not want to contribute much or anything at all. So I did allow each student one free pass a semester where they didn't have to say anything if they weren't sort of feeling up to it. I had one particular female student who was very quiet at the start, and there was one lesson where I could really tell as soon as she sort of started to talk that she there was other stuff going on in her brain, and she didn't feel like she was ready to contribute anything about it. So I offered her free class for the semester, and she took it. And I said, "But that's it. Next time, you're gonna have to contribute." And as the semester went on, and I think as she felt more and more comfortable with the other people in the circle and just university sort of in the program in general, she contributed more and more as it went on. Rule number 4, anyone can start, but the order must be passed in a clockwise or anti-clockwise direction to all the participants in the circle until everyone has had an opportunity to contribute. So I don't assign someone to start off. I let them pick who's going to start off. And there's always someone who'll put their hand up. There's probably always someone who will never put their hand up though. So there's someone who never talks first, but because the students sit in a random order pretty much each time, and the starter is reasonably random each time, and the starter is going to pick the direction they're going to go in, that student may never talk first, but they might have to talk immediately second, which is pretty close to first. So it stopped people sort of waiting back sort of and not contributing till everyone else had already said their piece, because there was a little bit of students saying, oh, well, they've already said all the stuff and I just agree with them. And then I would have to often encourage them to offer some more specific detail about something. If the students come in late, they can take a spot that's towards the end and they can get up to speed. Often we'll end up going around twice anyway, and that allows people to offer differing opinions, or if someone brought up something they hadn't thought of, they might like to talk about that. A lot of people pass the second time, But at some stage, even if people come in late, they're still getting to contribute in a reasonably meaningful way. Rule number 5, listen and be respectful to speakers. When someone is speaking, everyone must listen to their words. Take the speaker's words in and think about their meaning. So the focus here is on really listening to what the speaker's saying, not just hearing the words, but thinking about what they're saying and how it relates to what you think about it as well. Some people in some methods that I've heard of use like a talking piece that's passed around the circle as the person's talking, and you can only talk if you've got that special talking piece. But I certainly didn't find that necessary at all in my context. I think if you are doing it with younger children, either in high school or something like that, then that might work better, especially maybe even down into primary school. But I didn't find any need for the talking piece at all. By having the students listen to what one whole person says without saying anything, and actually not even talking until it gets around to them in the circle, it gives them time to reflect on what's being said, because they can't respond immediately. They've actually got to think about it and take it in. And also think about what they'll say. So if they start off not knowing what they're going to talk about, they've got time to see what other people are talking about and to see how it might link in with their life a bit, and then to offer up their dialogue. There's also time for opinions to change as new ideas are introduced. So that sometimes, as I was observing as we go around the circle and people would give their opinions, there'd be a real pattern in the way that they would change. And I have an example of that here. I think it was in our second lecture, which is after the initial one that I showed before and the one before the audio that I played. We looked at ethics, and I gave them this, it's known as the Heinz ethical dilemma, that I think he might have been a psychologist or a sociologist, I don't know, Kohlberg, back in 1963, came up with this way of devising a way of categorizing different moral responses to ethical dilemmas and putting people into different categories. And we actually looked at that after we had this yarning circle. So we had the yarning circle, and then I looked at Kohlberg's model once the students had shared sort of what they thought about it. Basically, he the story is there's a woman, she's near death. Her husband needs to be able to save her by using this medicine that can give her a chance of surviving, but the medicine's extremely expensive and the husband cannot get the medicine. So what should he do? Should he steal the medicine or not? And it was really funny watching it go around the circle. A lot of the students were like, no, he shouldn't steal it, no, he shouldn't steal it, no, he shouldn't steal it. And they were giving, obviously, more details than that as it went around, but they were all generally of the theme that he shouldn't steal it. And then it got to one of the students, and that student said, I would definitely steal it, no questions asked. And after that, everyone in the circle changed their minds, and everyone said, yeah, I'd steal it for this reason or this reason. I mean, they were still a bit worried about what would happen, like if they stole the medicine and they got caught and then they'd go to jail and they couldn't help the wife anyway. But it was really amazing that they were really sticking and sort of, it's actually one of the Kohlberg stages is social conformity, and that stealing's bad because it's against the law, and they were all sort of sticking to that. Then all of a sudden, one or two people said, I would definitely steal it. Like saving my wife is more important than anything else. And then it was just like a ripple that went around the circle. So it was really good. Rule number 6, You cannot talk out of turn, and there can be no conversation across the circle. If you want to address something someone has just said, you're going to have to wait your turn. And if it's that important, you'll remember. It's okay to disagree with someone, but you have to wait your turn to speak, and you don't tell someone else they're wrong. Instead, you just say what you think. And if that's different to what they think, it's fine, but you're not allowed to tell people that they're wrong. It's their opinion, and therefore it's right. It's their opinion. And then you can say your opinion if you want. This is actually the one that I found the most difficult as an educator. And you would have heard my voice on the audio that I played. So I can't say that I never ever talked while someone else was talking, but I really tried not to. But occasionally I did, either to offer encouragement or to ask for more details if the student was giving a really, really brief answer, or if they sort of touched on something that I knew was going to come up in the lecture later on, I would encourage them down that line of thought a bit and encourage them to talk more about that, because I knew it would be relevant later on. Or if I was directly asked a question, I would respond very briefly. Or if someone was sort of looking for affirmation. And it was certainly a challenge for me as well as the students to do that. But if someone started to interject and I'd put a hand up like that, instantly be quiet and wait out their turn, because they knew what they had to do. They're just used to being able to interject all the time. So that actually went better than I thought it would go. I think we're almost at the end. Rule number 7, when the discussion is complete, all the participants must check out. So as the semester went on, we looked at some issues like social justice, prejudice, and we discussed some pretty complicated and challenging sort of issues. We looked at Adam Goodes, and when he was basically forced to retire early due to booing and all the things that had led up to that occurring, and his very forthright championing of Aboriginal rights and not having racism, and the one-sided media reporting of a lot of that, which the students found, and I found too, quite challenging. And often the issues were also complicated, which I guess that ethical one before sort of showed. So students can encounter opinions or viewpoints which can conflict with their own. And they may start to question their initial thoughts on a matter or their preconceived ideas. We had one of the stimulus materials was an audio file by a guy, Luke Pearson, who you might have heard of. He runs Indigenous X on Twitter. He's reasonably well known. And he was talking about when you hear an idea that you might have believed this thing that someone said when you were like 8 years old, and you might have believed it for the last 30 years. And you just never questioned it because you heard it when you were little and you just sort of assumed it was right. And then all of a sudden you're talking about this issue and you realize, like, I've believed this my whole life and it's not right. So we could have moments like that as well. The checkout allowed me to judge whether I might need to have a little chat with someone after the class has ended. Just pull them aside and just sort of check whether they're okay, or even after my yarning circle, I go through the content and then into more of a tutorial sort of style lesson. And as I was circulating around, I could just sort of check in with them and see if they're okay. So in summary, I guess these are the important sort of things that I just wanted to bring out in conclusion, that you encourage your students to like speak from the heart. Okay, it doesn't really matter in a way whether they're right or wrong. They need to speak what they think, and they might decide that they're wrong later on, or they might decide they might be affirmed that they're right, or they might decide it's a really complicated thing and they can't quite decide. That's okay, but be present and authentic. And then on the other hand, listen from the heart. So they're paying attention to others. They're trying not to let any preconceived ideas or beliefs, attitudes, beliefs, and values that could contaminate what other people are saying. Just listen to them and just think about what they're saying. To be spontaneous without planning or storing information. There are a few times I was sitting there with crossed fingers because I wanted to remember to talk about something that someone else had said, and it would get to me and I'd forgotten. So I need to just be more spontaneous, I think, and just go with what I'm thinking at that moment, because that's the idea behind it. Try to be concise and to the point. Sometimes I need to give students a little wrap-up sort of signal if they're hogging the airtime. And what's been said in the circle stays in the circle. So someone says something you don't agree with, that's their opinion, it's fine. It stays in the circle, it's done. And that's it.
Cool.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Dan. I certainly enjoyed it, and I'm sure the audience did as well, actually. We do have a little bit of time for some questions. While people are sort of thinking about your questions, I've got a couple that came through in the chat. One was from Susie about what types of things do you do in the checkout? I think you probably would have covered some of those things. Is there anything else that you want to add to that, Susie?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because they're sitting in a circle. So the checkout, I'm guessing, is before everybody gets up and leaves the circle. Is that right? Or is that individually you check out?
Yeah, just as they go around, just once you decided that we're sort of done, they can do a checkout. Or I mean, sometimes it can. Sometimes I guess with that also, I didn't formally do a checkout. It was sometimes more just the end of what they said, sort of too, is more the checkout. So I sort of was a little bit plastic in the way I ran those check-ins and checkouts, but it was definitely in there. But it would depend maybe on the timing as well, and the topic, whether I thought it, like sometimes it's sort of more important, I think, to have a checkout.
Like things like how are you feeling now, or what?
Yeah, like with,
something like one word to describe how you're feeling now, or
yeah. Or I might even say like after the people have sort of stopped talking to some degree, I'd say like, so we discussed some like really or once it's gone around once, I might say we discussed some really sort of controversial ideas there. Like, did anyone want to say anything more about how they're feeling about it? So sometimes it might be a pretty informal sort of thing, just based on the mood of the students and my perception of that and the topic. But sometimes it might actually be a bit more formal as well.
On a very practical thing, because you know, with these yarning circles, which I just love, and we do something similar in our program with a name-telling story, a storytelling about their name. But you know, we just encounter sort of very practical things, like especially in COVID times, moving furniture around and getting it into a circle. So have you got any suggestions with that, or just?
Well, we didn't have too many issues here with COVID to some degree. I mean, we shut semester one last year when things were really bad everywhere, and it was all starting out. And then a lot of the university classes were offline, but we came back face-to-face. The PUG students came back face-to-face semester two last year, halfway through last year. And we've been face-to-face the whole time. So I guess, I mean, we just haven't had that many cases in Newcastle, really. Every now and then there's a slight bit of a flare-up, but we haven't, and we did have, I mean, the university had things around, like they had cleaning cloths where you could clean desks and different stuff like that. But to be honest, it hasn't been, thankfully, it hasn't been much of an issue here.
Can I just add in add a question related to that? Was to what way, in what ways do you think we can use these yarning circles, which I find such a brilliant from a pedagogical point of view, with technology? Does it help or hinder facilitating something like that, say via Zoom or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be hard to do on Zoom. I think part of getting it to work really smoothly is picking up on that feedback, so that me as the facilitator can pick up on that general feeling in the room, sort of, and looking at each student and judging how they're feeling about different stuff and whether to push them or not. And that, I mean, we all know that that's incredibly hard to do on Zoom. And when I was teaching on Zoom in semester 1 last year, I found it really unengaging, and the students, it was really hard. We just weren't getting any of that informal feedback from students. Often they wouldn't even have their cameras on, and even if they did, like, it's not the same, and it's not that. I mean, not that this is such an issue, but there's not that same backwards and forwards of conversation. It's even more difficult on Zoom, which I guess for the yarning circle in a way isn't so important. What was the first part of your question?
Yeah, no, I think you've answered. It's just basically, does the technology help or hinder?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a technology type thing. I think it's really a face-to-face thing. Oh, what else I was going to say was, you do need a little bit of flexibility in the way you do things. So to a certain degree, I'm lucky because my lecture is always just before my tutorial, so they're not separated. It's one group, they're all face-to-face, they're all the same. So I really have a lot of flexibility in the way I can do it. And often the yarning circle we might not finish the yarning circle till at least half an hour into the lesson. And then I'm going to go on and sort of do my lecture. So what I've sort of effectively done is taken some of the tutorial time and put it at the start of the lecture, really.
Right.
Sort of as a setup and a start off, a springboard. But I would imagine that everyone can't do that. And I think it would be really difficult. I think it works well because I've got a small cohort, relatively small, and they know each other and they see each other all the time. So I think in bigger cohorts or ones where they went in multiple classes together all the time, I'm not convinced it would work so well.
We are running out of time, but there are a couple of more questions coming through. So I hope if you have 5 or so more minutes, Dan and anybody else, if you just hang around for a little bit longer, we'd probably cover a couple of more questions. Now, Roger Cook had a couple of questions coming through. Is Roger still online? Did you want to turn on your microphone? And
yeah, I'm still here, Praneet.
Yep.
Thanks.
Did you want to just vocalize your questions to Dan?
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. That was really interesting. I was wondering, after students get experience with this, whether they could run the circles themselves in smaller groups and then maybe feedback to a whole class. And the other question was, what sort of group size do you think works well to encourage discussion?
Yep. I think that's an excellent idea. I think if once you'd run it through maybe 3 or 4 times. I mean, it might depend on the topic too. I think if it was a straightforward topic, it would be really easy. I think if it was a more challenging topic, they might find it a little bit trickier, just because they don't have that sort of experience about when to quickly add something that's going to make it all work better. But I also think cohort size. Look, so my class generally starts out somewhere between, it's pretty variable, like maybe 10 to 30. And then some of them will drop off immediately, which I imagine is pretty similar across most enabling programs. And then you have that slow sort of gradual decline towards the end of the semester. So I probably the most we ever had was about sort of maybe 14 in the circle at the start of the semester. And then towards the end, it was in single figures. So I think that's a good amount. You really want to at least probably, I think optimum would be somewhere around 8 to 12 would probably really be optimal. If you go too low, you can sort of, you don't get enough opinions and it goes around a bit too quick. But if the circle's too big, it's going to be so long to get back, and you have to talk, that I think it would probably affect the engagement a bit. So I certainly wouldn't want to go over 20 in my sort of context.
That's great. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks for that. I've got a question here for you as well, Dan. In your program, in your book program, you mentioned you have it's only for Indigenous students, and your yarning circles operates within that environment. Once again, from a pedagogical point of view, I find the process that you use is such a brilliant idea to get any students, all students, to open up and reflect and all of the types of things that we want students to do in higher education. What's your opinion or any suggestions about using this approach with non-Indigenous students?
Look, I think it ties in directly with a lot of different teaching methods. When I was a high school teacher, I used to use a method called format a little bit, where you start off with an introductory sort of phase, and then you move into a teaching phase where you introduce new concepts, and you move into a sort of guided practice sort of phase, and then a concluding celebration of learning sort of phase. So I sort of modeled it a little bit on that, because I think it fits in well with that, and I'm trying to sort of merge 8 ways into that. So that I'm using what I know is an educational method that will work well, and it's got those distinct sort of phases. But the yarning circle just really fits into that starting off the lesson. Here's our new knowledge that we're going to have a look at. What do you already know? And it's a really nice informal way of doing a bit of pre-assessment about where the students are at, and they don't even know you're doing it, but that's actually sort of what's happening. So that's just naturally occurring, and at the same time you're building those connections between the students, so that it's totally different. When I came to uni, and it's probably the same for a lot of you, I didn't know anyone. Like for those first few weeks, I literally knew no one. And I would be in different classes all the time, and it took me ages to sort of, I don't think I really felt like I really fitted in until probably halfway through my second year. But these students, I had one today. We just had a festival sort of event here, a cultural event, and there's school students come to it. So I had one of my old high school students come to that, and he was asking for information about your pug, and his mum wanted him to do it next year and stuff, and I was giving him a brochure, and one of my current students from your pug was there, and I said, Kobe, talk to Phoenix, like tell him, and he's just like sprouting out all these benefits of the program. It's just it's like I can get them to do all my advertising for me now.
That's fantastic. Now we are a little bit over time. Does anybody have any one last final question for Dan before we wrap it up? Feel free to unmute yourself if you do have any questions. It doesn't look like it. Dan, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing your ideas with us. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at the chat, but some really amazing, really wonderful feedback has been coming through, and people really do appreciate what you had to share. I certainly really enjoyed your session today as well, so thank you very much for that. And we'll probably wrap it up there, and I'll stop the